mother was Agnes Valier Klein, was her maiden name, and my dad was Paul Connell Taylor. And my niece, Vicki, you met her, put together this wonderful calendar at their 60th anniversary. So everything actually is written in here about how and when and where they met. It says, 60 years have gone by all too quickly. They have weathered them all fearlessly. Through the hard years, the lean years, the good years, to this vintage year, 1983, was when they had been married 60 years. Can you imagine? Anyway, so we had a lot to live up to. Here we're 59 years, so next year will be our 60th, so this is kind of similar. Okay, their parents, who were this lovely lady here, she was a Wilson and he was a Klein. They were married at sea, if you can imagine, because their parents didn't want them to get married at that young age. Oh no. So they went out to sea, and you could have a sea captain marry you after you got outside of the water, the national waters. So anyway, and they had 3 children, 3 girls, 3 beautiful girls. This was my mom, and then her little sister, and then the sister that I was named after, Wilma Ruth. And anyway, I've got pictures all over the house of them, and memories that I treasure, and hopefully somebody else will treasure someday too, you know. But anyway, the Taylors, my father's parents, were quite prominent in Hoquiam. He was a city councilman, an inventor, and like your dad, he was a real estate investor. And he invested, and when the big crash came, it was terrible that happened, because lost a lot of money, obviously, but he paid back all of his investors. He was very honest, and that was the hallmark of Maston Taylor. He really, even though he lost money in the big crash, they call it, in 1927. Anyway, and then the Kleins, who had been seafaring people and came from a Wilsons, who came all the way from England, blah blah blah, and settled in Oregon, and then moved to Washington and became lumber, I wouldn't say tycoons, but they owned a lot of lumber, let's put it this way. And the Boy Scout project that William did was actually from the yellow cedar that came from we think it came from my grandparents' lumber company, because they would send it down in ships, and infrastructure was built in Placerville. Isn't it amazing how things come together? It said, any significant events in my parents' life. Well, yes. As I say, the crash happened, and their parents, who had, the Taylors had taken their little baby in their pram. They call it a pram, a buggy like that, and the Connells and the Kleins had taken and they'd always thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice if our children got married? Well, they did get married. When my mother was, I guess she was 18, maybe she was 17, let's see, she was born in September. Yeah, she wasn't 18 yet. She graduated from high school, and she had saved all of her money for many, many years, and she wanted to be a teacher. And she was going to go away to become a teacher. And her father said no. And so my mother tells the story that she cried for days because her father wouldn't let her go to college. That was back, in the 1920s. And girls didn't. And also, she was the only daughter left. One of the daughters had died in the flu epidemic, and another daughter had moved away and gotten married. And so she was the only child left at home, and he just wouldn't let her go away. So her mother, Belle, sweet lady that had rode the pram with the Connell and Taylor mother, said, well, I'm going to send you to see my good friend out in Yakima. As I said, the Taylors he was an investor, he was councilman in Hoquiam, but they also owned a lot of land out in the White Swan, Yakima area of Washington, and that's where he got a lot of his produce and fresh, things that he sold in Hoquiam. Sent Agnes, little Agnes, almost 18 years old, to stay with her good friend and help her She was the president. Her good friend Nettie Connell Taylor was the principal of a girls' school, and really believed in education for women, and so Belle, my grandma, my mother's mother, sent her to be with Nettie and help her at the house and that sort of thing. Well, anyway, she got acquainted with Paul, and he kind of swept her off her feet. So that by the time she was 18, she was engaged, and they were married on November 1st. And a sweet little, in those days you had little small weddings, but in handmade gowns and beautiful, just very small in front of the fireplace. And it might have been a fireplace like this. It wasn't this one, but it might have been a fireplace like that. And soon they had my sister Rosie, who is Vicky's mom, and then 11 months later, they had my sister Pauline, who is still alive up in she's 92 now, and she has 4 children. And then my sister Virginia, and then my brother Paul. And then I didn't come along until 11 years later. And let's see, is that anything? Oh, and then after me came another little girl. So in other words, my mother had a total of 6 children. Came another little girl, and she was born prematurely with a hole in her heart, and also my mother was 40 at the time, and that's when, as you get older, the chances of having a Down syndrome children are increased. And they didn't have amniocentesis then, and they didn't have, but when she was born, she was premature, and the doctor said, "Oh, don't take her, just leave her here, give her to a home to care for her." My mother said, "What?" And she took my little sister Kathleen home, and she thrived. She really did. She never was able to sit up by herself, but she was just fun to play with. She was my little sister, dear little sister. But when I went to kindergarten, I brought home the measles, and my little sister, with a hole in her heart and being weak, caught the measles from me, and then she went into pneumonia and she died. So that was a significant tragedy in my mother's life. She just, my mom and dad were so sad. I can still remember, running into their room, and I had a crucifix over my bed, and there was a light that shone on that crucifix. Now maybe we can explain it away as a light from the street light or whatever it was. But anyway, I ran into their bedroom and I said, "Kathleen's all right. She's with Jesus." I remember telling them, "Don't be afraid." I remember trying to help them feel not so sad. I was 6 years old. And at that time, I couldn't go to a funeral. That was not what children did. They weren't allowed to go to her, so I wasn't really allowed to grieve for her. But I think I became a nurse because I saw her in the hospital. I saw her with an oxygen tent. And my sister, Virginia, who was the nurse, PhD public health nurse, I think that's why she went into nursing. And she was my mother's helper because she was 12 years old when I was born. And so she was my mother's helper for Kathleen and for me. She just loved taking care of children. So that was a very bad tragedy. Let's see, my arrival, that early years, I already talked about when I was born. I was born 11 years after my brother. And they wanted, my mother was, the other children were teenagers. My sister Rosie and my sister Pauline were off on their own. Virginia was still at home, and of course my brother Paul. He was jealous of me, my sister. He would come in, my sister told me later, he would come in when I was a baby and pinch me to try to make me cry so they'd think I was a bad baby, and I was a grouchy baby. And so she caught him doing that one day. And so she was my protector after that. Anyway, any history behind my name? As I said, I was named after my mother's sister, who was Wilma Ruth Klein. And so Ruth, and then Mary, Ruth Mary was the pastor's first and second name. And so very good friend of my mother, so that's how I got my name Ruth. What were some funny stories your parents told you about your first years in life? Oh, well, my brother pinching me. My first word, I don't know. But when I was 6 or 7 years old, this is kind of funny. I was kind of mature because I had older sisters and brothers. They say that when you have older sisters and brothers, you do mature early. And of course, my little sister had passed away. They had a Santa Claus come and deliver presents at the house we were at. And I ran up to Santa Claus and I said, "I know you. You're Mr. So-and-so from across the street." just from his voice, and my mother had been friends, and I had been friends with, gone over with her to visit, and to have tea or whatever when I know you. So I didn't believe in Santa Claus after that. But anyway, that was, and they were all shocked. How do you know? He was all dressed up and fat and beard and all. It was funny. Okay, adolescent years. Where did you go to school? Okay, and how was it? Well, let's see. I went to a one-room schoolhouse. We moved when I was 8 years old. I was not healthy. And my mother was not healthy either. Washington, there's always rain. And so we were always sick. And as it turned out, that is my weak point, my lungs. I have asthma. And my mother had emphysema in later life from my dad's secondhand smoke. She never smoked. But, we lived in an environment where there was secondhand smoke. And plus the winter weather just wasn't good for Washington. And my mother said, we need a change, and we're going to California. My sister, Rosie, had already gotten married and had a new baby, and so she said, we're moving to California. And my dad, the little teardrop trailer that Julie has bought, my dad made one. They had a kit, and he made one out of plywood. In fact, I've got the letter. I could read it to you. September 28th, 1948, Paul and Agnes and Ruth, at age 8.5, arrived in Sebastopol. Now that's where Herman grew up, part of his life. And Agnes called Rosie, who was in Alameda, and as I mentioned before, imagine in 1948, the car we had was a 1925 Dodge with wooden spokes carrying this trailer behind us. What a sight. But it was a good car, but 1925 and 1948, it was an old car. And it was a touring car. It was really kind of pretty. We pulled a homemade trailer that had a bed and an upper bunk for Ruth, and a chuck wagon back that lifted up. It was a little different than Julie's, but it lifted up and back, if you can imagine, where a big door pulled down, and then had the cooking stove, a camp stove. And anyway, Mr. Polly, the real estate man, gave permission to stay on some property at the edge of Sebastopol. It was for sale. However, the people who owned it at Sacramento never settled their estate, and so we gave up and went we looked for a better place to stay. The rains came in October the 4th, and I wanted to get Ruth back in school, and we found an apartment at the Hutchinson Apple Ranch. It was a beautiful, beautiful Dutch colonial house, and they had a packing house with automatic rollers that the boxes would fly, and you'd sort the apples, and anyway, and I went to school there, and I wanted to get Ruth back in school, and it was let's see, and I had a very nice teacher. Now this was a 3-room schoolhouse. The grades were separated in such a way, and so actually, since I was smart, when they were teaching the second grade, I was doing 3rd grade work or 4th grade work or whatever, so I kind of accelerated that way. And anyway, we didn't stay there too long. He talked to a man in Sebastopol, and my dad bought a Shell gas station. He had been in the gas station business up in Washington. And the man wanted to sell, and so Paul talked business and went to the big boss, and in 2 weeks, we were in the gas business again. Mr. and Mrs. Elliott, it was a beautiful old house, but of course we had no furniture. We left all our furniture up in Washington. We eventually went up and got the piano and different things that we had left behind, but we had no furniture. So there was a big 5-bedroom Victorian in back of the gas station. It was really pretty, and it also had some like a motel, 3 or 4 little places that we could rent out. But my parents never wanted to rent out, so they didn't do that business. But anyway, let's see. Mrs. Elliott, who had owned the house, left the curtains, and I bought 2 small end tables, secondhand, of course, because we didn't have any money. Anyway, and I always remember my mother is so clever. I mean, she'd take just something small, something left over from some other place, and make something pretty out of it by putting, she would drape material or something, and I remember her making me a little vanity so I could comb my hair in the morning, I mean, very sweet. She was just very thoughtful and very sweet. Okay, so then from Sebastopol, we kept looking for, Daddy wanted some ranch land of his own. I mean, this was in the city. And he found our place in Santa Rosa where Ronnie is now. And it was 10 acres to start with, and had a creek running through it. Really a beautiful apple orchard, and my dad built that house from scratch. My dad and mom built that house from scratch. And it was really, it's old and run down. It's 100 years old now, obviously. But it was very nice. And my sister Rosie and Gordon would come from Alameda and leave Ronnie and Vicky there, and we would babysit while they would go to the Russian River for a weekend or something, and it was a nice place to be. What mode of transportation did I use? Well, I walked. I walked everywhere. I walked to the bus stop. I walked to the neighbor's house. I babysat at the age of 12 because, as I say, I was tall and mature. I babysat for 50 cents an hour. Oh my God! Of course, at that time I was a little. I even had a summer job babysitting for the secretary of the major hospital in town. And I took care of her 2 little boys who were rambunctious little rips. I tell you, was I ever glad to get them down for a nap. But I babysat all day for them at 12 years old, can you imagine? And that was my summer job. And let's see, did we have any pets? Well, even though I was allergic to dog hair and cat hair, we did have cats because they would take care of the mice from the field. And we did have my dog Daisy. She was a white, fluffy, white dog with black ears that Rosie and Gordon had given me for my birthday, and Daisy was my precious pet, and she was. but if I pet her or if I pet the cats, I would start itching. I also eventually had a horse, and I was allergic to him, but I would curry him and cry the whole time while because tears, allergies, and I had pneumonia several times. Anyway, by the time I was 16, 17 years old, we had figured out this was allergies. We really didn't know, we didn't really go to the doctor to get diagnosed that much. You got ill, you got well, And but anyway, when I moved away, when I married Herman, my allergies went away. I didn't have any cats and dogs anymore, and I was really pretty well for quite some time, unless I would go over to somebody's house who had animals, and then I would start getting asthma. And so then I realized I'd have to not do that. The holidays, fun traditions. Oh, we would always go to the Rose Parade in Santa Rosa. We'd always do that. That was a fun tradition. I actually, because I was an artist, I was a good artist, I actually drew the program that was chosen, it was a contest, drew the program that was chosen for the official program for the Rose Parade one year. Let's see, what did I do in my free time? Oh, I rode my horse. Oh yeah, they finally had to get me a horse because I was either going to become a horse or get a horse. My sister Rosie and Gordon came up, and here I was galloping through the fields, and I had a ponytail, of course, and this was when I was about, I'd say 13. So I was quite young actually, to be doing something like that. I wouldn't do it older. And then I bent down and ate the grass, and they said, Mom and Dad, you got to get that girl a horse before she becomes one. So anyway, I had a wonderful horse. He was a Hackney pony. I don't know if you ever heard of a pony that they run with a carriage. And they have races. There's a carriage behind him, and he was a trotter, and so you could run with him. He wouldn't gallop, but he would trot. And it was the nicest. It was the nicest way to ride a horse. I mean, it wasn't rough. It was smooth because he was a trotter. What was your relationship with it? Well, because I was born late in life. I was born when my mother was 38. By the time I became a teenager, they didn't understand that I would, want to go to football games and things like that. So I never went to football games. But actually, I'm glad I didn't now, because I would come home on the bus and I would do my homework, and I would be smarter than the rest of the kids because I'd do my homework, And I didn't really date. My first date was in the 9th grade, and his parents drove us to and from the movies. And that lasted for a few months, Anyway, but I learned how to kiss at 9th grade. Okay. Name some times you got in trouble or did silly things. I don't know. I was a good kid. I guess I didn't get in trouble much. I can't think of anything right now. What was my most prized possession? Well, the horse, of course. but I sold him when I was 16 because I really didn't ride him enough. My dad, he got kind of wild actually. My dad couldn't ride him anymore because he would go out in the back 10 acres, and he was just happy as a clam being a horse. He didn't want to be ridden anymore. So I sold him when I was 16. What accomplishment were you really proud of? Well, I became a National Merit Scholar, however, my dad, kind of like my grandfather, weird. I've had men in my life who were just, or in my mother's life, who were very controlling, I guess you'd say. And Herman's kind of that way too. He's very controlling. And I give in, and my mother gave in, obviously, but she cried for days. Well, anyway, my dad, you had to fill out, in order to get the scholarship, which was quite a bit of money in those days. I could have gone to Stanford, I could have gone anywhere I wanted. He would not fill out the financial forms. He just wasn't going to let me go away for college. And so I missed out on that. But, I did go to college. I did go to the local college. And I got a scholarship. I got a $500 scholarship, which wasn't much compared to the National Merit Scholarship. And I took art history, and I was going to be a teacher. And then my girlfriend, my best girlfriend, was doing a nursing track study. So I got interested in her studies, and she got interested in mine. She ended up being a teacher, and I ended up being a nurse. So we kind of, we liked each other's studies. I had great teachers at the college I went to, the local college. I just didn't have that Stanford. That my girlfriend, my other girlfriend, she was an alternate. She took my place, and we're still friends. We're still good friends, and I was glad. She was a pastor's daughter, and the pastors in those days didn't make much money, just like my dad didn't make much money. So both of us had a financial need, and both of us did well on the natural merit, but I was the finalist. She was the alternate. Anyway, let's see. So that's something I'm proud of, but also sad that, you wonder what your life would have been. I don't know. Would it have been any better? I don't know. Oh, my driver's license. My parents always had old cars, stick shifts. My girlfriends had automatic transmissions and things like that. They got their driver's license when they were 16. Anyway, I did not, because that stick shift and the driver's test that they gave in Santa Rosa, it was a toughie. You had to go up a hill and figure out how to turn around on a hill and come back. I mean, it was difficult. Well, I didn't pass at 16, so I still had a learner's permit. And I'd drive with my mother, and I was a good driver, but man, that driver's test was a killer. Anyway, when I graduated from high school, my sister, Rosie, and Virginia paid my way to fly to Arizona to be with my sister, Virginia, for the summer. And I would be driving my sister's little car. It was a 1952, no, it was more than that. So it must have been a 1957, a modern car. My sisters all had modern stuff. And anyway, I would drive through the little town that we were in as, a learning my sister in the passenger seat. And we would drive around. I would drive her to the grocery store. I'd drive her wherever she was going. And anyway, I took the Arizona driver's written test, and I went in to take the driver's test, and it was hotter than Hades outside. And the guy at the desk said, "Hey, I've seen you driving around town. Huh, you're a good driver. Here's your driver's license." I didn't have to take the driver's license. It's too hot out there. We don't want to go driving. So I got my driver's test in Arizona. So when I came back from Arizona, all I had to do was go down to California and just I never had to take that horrible test that they had in Santa Rosa. So anyway, that's... One of my best friends was Shirley Ann. She was a pastor's daughter, and I would spend, we would spend the night at each other's house, and talk like teenagers do. But when we spent the time at her house, her mother was a teacher and very, very strict, and Shirley Ann would have to get up. We would get up normally to go to school at 8 o'clock. But she would have to get up at 6:30 and play the piano for an hour before, and I'd lay in bed and just listen to her, or whatever. But boy, she had a mother who really, really, towed the mark. And then another one was Paulette. She actually was, she lived out in the country as I did, and we both rode the bus. And we were both singers. I had taken chorus in school, and so did she. And we would harmonize on the bus because, you know, the kids in the back of the bus were rowdy, but we would harmonize, and the bus driver loved to hear us sing. So that's what we would do. And let's see, another that I'm still lifelong friends with. I mean, I'm still friends with Shirley Ann and Paulette, but closer to some other people that I went to college with, or went, you know, or stayed in town. Let's put it that way. And anyway, let's see. What were some hobbies you had, or sports you? Oh, I was pretty athletic actually. I could really pitch a good softball right over the plate, and so I was the pitcher. And I hated to run though. I hated to run to first base. You know, I hated to be the, you know, on the other side of the pitch. But I could hit too. And I was president of the GAA, Girls Athletic Society, and I was captain of the girls basketball team. And we actually played the seniors, if you can imagine, when we were in the 9th grade. No, excuse me. We were in the 8th grade. They were still in junior high. We were in 8th grade, and the 9th graders, we played the 9th graders, and they were big, tall girls. And because our little team was so good, but I really goofed. I was the captain, and when the teacher said, "Do you want a full court or a half court?" and I thought she meant, now, have you ever played basketball in high school? Well, anyway, we would play really on half of what the boys would play. You know, the basket was this way rather than that way, and I thought she meant that we were going to play half court, half of a half court. And I said, no, we want to play full court. And so they opened up the big partitions, and here we were playing on the boys. Oh no, I didn't mean that. Well, you already made the choice. So anyway, we lost. It was a killer. If you can imagine what those guys do, you know, when you watch the basketball on TV, I mean, man, that's a long way up and down what the boys do. And well, we lost because we just didn't have the stamina. I mean, I think we would have really been given them a good run for their money if we'd had the half court. But I thought she meant the half of the half. Oh, geez, I was a bad girl. Oh, what job did he have as a teen? Oh, well, I started out helping my dad. He had a fruit stand before they had farmers markets. He would go to San Francisco and buy the fresh fruit from all the, you know, from all the fruit producing farms, and bring back fruit to Santa Rosa. And it was before they had these big, beautiful farmers markets like Acadas and all those things. And he would sell out of the back of his truck. And so I helped him in the summer. So at age 13, I had graduated from 50 cents an hour babysitting at 12. And I helped him. But he really didn't pay me. He just said, well, if you need some money, Ruthie, I'll see what I can do, you know. So anyway, I worked one summer doing that. So the next summer, I thought, well, I'll make more money by working there was a prune orchard that needed to have prunes picked up off the ground, and then you'd put them into great big lugs and carry them to the truck. I mean, God, what a lot of hard work. Anyway, I only did that one summer too. I thought my fingers would die. I mean, picking, you know, out of the dirt, and oh man, and the heat. Ah, what a job. So anyway, I had one job, my dad, I didn't get really paid, and then now the prune. So anyway, by the time I was 16, and you could start to work then, you were legally, you had your Social Security. That's when you got your Social Security card, not like today, you get it when you're born. I worked at Rosenberg's in the jewelry department. And at 16, I looked like a 18-year-old. I mean, I was tall and you know, well-developed, I guess you'd say, and mature looking. And so I worked in the jewelry department. And I had to buy a black dress to work in the jewelry department. And I bought this lovely black dress. It was just beautiful. It was backless. It went like this, and then it was open in the back, and it had a satin bow around the, you know, around the waist, and looked very elegant. And with my discount, I could buy jewelry, or I could buy clothes, so that was nice because I bought a beautiful Pendleton. Before that, I had been sewing my own Pendleton skirts and sewing, and my mother was helping me, you know, get by on less expensive clothes. But when I got my job at Rosenberg's, I was able to buy some really pretty things and look pretty sharp when I went to school, obviously. And my girlfriend Paulette, as I started to say, we were about the same size, you know, in stature, but she was beautiful. Blonde hair, natural blonde hair, beautiful blue eyes, and the longest eyelashes you ever want to see. And she would use the curler to curl them, you know, and she could have been a movie star. She really could. She looked like Ken Novak, but she didn't have the ambition. In fact, one of her teachers really would have tried to get her. She was in drama, but she didn't like school, so she wasn't really a good student for him. But he really wanted to get her in the movies or something. And I mean, she could have been, but she just didn't have ambition. She hated school. She ended up not graduating from high school, actually. And she went out a lot with boys and was very popular. But anyway, I admired her, and I followed her like a puppy. Whatever Paulette wants to do, Ruthie will do, you know. And here's Ruthie Smart, right? I don't know if I should tell you this. This is something I'm really ashamed of, but yet it's a stupid thing you do as a teenager. As I say, Paulette was beautiful, and we both were mature looking. Paulette had her driver's license. I didn't at this time even have a driver's license. She wanted to go to San Francisco, and she said, "Let's go borrow a car at one of the car agencies." Oh, sure, yeah, let's do that. Of course, she's the only one that has a driver's license, right? She goes in and she's all dressed up and she makes up this story. I mean, it's a completely false story about us needing this Lincoln Continental for the night to drive a friend of theirs who's going to be in a parade in Petaluma. Well, I don't even know if there's a parade or what. There must have been for her to make up that. I don't remember. But anyway, we weren't going to any parade. We were going to go driving to San Francisco. We put gas in she got the car. This guy thought, boy, this girl's hot, you know. I'll do something nice for her. He was a salesman, you know, a young man. Oh yeah, sure, here's the keys. Can you imagine? We didn't leave any security. We got in the car and drove away. And Paulette's driving. We drove all the way to San Francisco, had a Coke at Mel's Drive-In, turned around and came back home. I mean, it was stupid. But we got home so late, the car agency was closed, obviously, at 11 o'clock at night. And we drove home to her mother's house. Oh, and then the other thing, Ruthie, you should drive this car a little ways. I said, but I don't have a driver's license. Oh, nobody will matter. I got behind the wheel and I actually drove that stupid car. Can you imagine if a policeman had... Can you imagine? Our lives would have been ruined. I mean, stupid. Well, anyway, I did drive the car for about 10 miles and then I gave it back to her to drive home out to the country where, you know, we slept in the car that night. We're just queens. We're so rich we can afford a Continental, you know. Oh, God. Anyway, her mother came out in the morning and said, Paulette, this man has been calling all evening last night. Where were you? You know. And so, in the meantime, she had called my mother, come and get Ruthie. And I went home with my mother, and Paulette went down to the car agency with her mother, and her mother was a good storyteller too, so somehow she didn't get in trouble. But can you imagine? Well, anyway, that's the only bad thing I ever really did. I really was a good girl, but whenever Paulette said, let's do something, in fact, Herman will tell you, we double dated with one of her boyfriends. We could have been killed in that night too, because he was a terrible driver, and he drove us out to the Russian River, terrible narrow road. And I mean, Herman and I were both scared in the back seat. We're never going to get home. You know, whatever Paulette was doing, you know, Ruthie was, oh yeah, sure. Good. Oh, anyway, so that's bad. Did you date anyone? As I told you, my first date was in 9th grade, and then I didn't, as I say, because I lived so far out in the country, no boy wanted to come and get me. A, because they couldn't drive, you know, by the time they were, but Herman did meet me at a DeMolay dance. There was this boy at school, I was 16, there was this boy at school, and he ended up being a judge. I mean, how about that? Anyway, he liked me for some reason. I mean, I was smart, he was smart, but he was a dork. You know, Paulette didn't like him, and my other girlfriends thought, oh, he's a dork. What do you want to go out with him for? So he had asked me out 3 times. And I remember saying one of the times, no, the first time he asked me out, oh, well, my parents and I are going to go to Alameda to visit my sister this weekend. Well, we weren't, but I made up the story. No, I'm not available. And so I thought I'd never hear from him again. He called me again. Would you like to go out? Oh, no, I'm going to be sick I remember saying I'm going to be sick this weekend. I remember saying something stupid like that. I'm going to be sick this weekend. And anyway, he was a nice enough guy, but he was just kind of dorky. Anyway, I know. Actually, he wasn't dorky. He was kind of self-important too. That was the other thing. He was kind of arrogant. I didn't like that, as well as being dorky, and as well as Paulette not thinking he was good enough for Ruthie. He asked me out a 3rd time. Oh, okay. There was a DeMolay dance, and I did want to go to the dance, naturally, right? Okay, all right. And I had a pretty dress, and anyway, he showed up. His father, again, he didn't know how to drive. His father showed up in their Cadillac. He was an insurance broker. You know, they were well fixed. I mean, gee, Ruthie should have known he would have turned out to be something pretty fancy. You know, why didn't I like him? No, I just didn't like him. And he brought me a beautiful orchid. Anyway, we went to the DeMolay dance, and he was a terrible dancer. Just so bad. I mean, it was close dancing in those days. You know, it wasn't, you know, rock and roll type. And he would go around in a circle, continually in a circle. And my leg got so tired, because this was my pivot leg, I have to sit down. And most of the time, you know, after 1 dance, or 2 dances, or 3 dances, I really have to sit down, Bobby. Why don't you go get me some punch or something, you know? Anyway, while I was sitting, and I had been sitting there quite a while with some other girls, you know, Herman comes over and asks me for a dance. Now, again, I'm being very rude, right? Not dancing with that one that came with me, and accepting a dance with this cute guy. I was rude. To poor Bobby. I thought, well, this will get rid of him. Well, it did get rid of him. But anyway, I met Herman, and he asked me out on a date, and I said, and I finally was being more proper, and said, no, I'm in the phone book, and if you wish to call me, that's fine. And I gave him my name, and or my dad's name. I gave him my dad's name, and you can look it up. Well, he did. He followed through, and he did call, and he did ask if I could go for a drive on Memorial weekend, and because I said I wasn't going to go out to a movie with this perfect stranger, you know, I mean, where people made out and all that other stuff. I wasn't going to do that. And so anyway, I was starting to be proper. So we went for a drive in his Volkswagen, and then after that we did go on dates for that summer. And but then we broke up when I went to high school, because I was ready to go to high school. Then we broke up. He says he broke up with me. I broke up with him. Anyway, and we didn't know each other again until I was in 12th grade. And here again, Paulette. Now, can you imagine? I should have kicked him off the road or something. He asked my girlfriend Paulette for a date. Can you imagine? I mean, and then here's stupid Ruth again. Paulette says, no, because he was beneath her. She was by then dating college men, you know, and he's, no, but Ruthie might like to go out with you. So then he asked me out. But she hadn't told me that Herman had asked her first, so I did. I went out with him, and then we started going. But I learned afterwards, oh, you did go out with him? Why did you? So anyway, then we liked each other. But, I mean, I wasn't desperate, but can you imagine him asking my girlfriend out on a date? First, any club or organization I belonged to, 4-H, whatever, I was in leadership. I was in 4-H, and I became an all-star by raising a steer and let's see, what else did I do? I raised sewing, and I had other projects, that I did to become an all-star. And an all-star was a pretty big deal. It's like an Eagle Scout, in different levels. Let's see, early adulthood. What age did you move out? Well, I didn't ever move out until I got married. However, I did work on the weekends when I was in college. I did work for the people who owned the Purple Onion. It was a nightclub in San Francisco, and they would be gone on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so I was their housekeeper and babysitter, or nanny, I guess you'd call it. They had twin girls who were 5, and a boy who was, let's see, Rocky must have been 8 or 9, and he was a handful. He had been adopted, and then they ended up having their own natural children. And Rocky really, he had a real mean streak, and he didn't like his sisters, and it was really tough. And as I say, I was dating Herman by then, and so Herman would come over on the weekend and kind of manhandle Rocky, I guess you'd say, or keep him in line, because he was really mean to those girls, and was, didn't pay attention to me either. And he one night took his father's gun out of the closet, and I called Herman immediately. I said, I can't stop him. He'd shoot me if I tried to stop him. Herman came over, and Herman went looking for him, because Rocky had left the house with a gun. And anyway, he and another boy who had a gun were shooting at cars. This is like a 10-year-old, as I say, and he was incorrigible. So his parents actually put him he was going to go to reform school when the judge, and his parents, because they were wealthy, put him at Hannah Boys Center. Have you heard of Hannah Boys Center? Well, anyway, it's a very good Catholic private school for boys who have gotten in trouble. Now it's boys who have gotten in trouble with drugs and things like that, but boys. And Rocky really, to give some background as to why he would be jealous, he really wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, and his sisters really were. He was behind in school. He didn't like reading. He was unhappy. He was an unhappy boy. And then with his parents being gone, and they had a housekeeper before who really did let him run roughshod, but I was more strict. As I say, by then I was 18, 19 years old, and I really. But after he left, it was so nice. I took care of them for another 2 years, the girls, and Herman and I were invited to come to the Purple Onion. We got to see the comedian Ronnie Schell, Phyllis Diller, the Kingston Trio when they started out. These were San Francisco people who started their careers in San Francisco at this Purple Onion. After Herman and I got married, actually the Steinhoff still wanted us to take care of the children. So we did. Because I was finishing college and Herman was working during the week, and on the weekends I would still take care of the children. And they would allow us to come and be a married couple, in their bedroom, and which was really very nice because it was a lovely home. And I cleaned the place. I was very, very good at cleaning the place, and they paid me really well. That's how I had so much money in the bank when we got married, so that we could put a down payment on our first house. We were in an apartment for 1 month, and then my dad had paid for that. And after that, we owned a home, and I had saved a lot of money. In those days, it was a lot of money toward that from my job. And Herman, of course, was frugal too, I guess. And we put $14,000 down on our first home. Our first home cost $14,000. We put, our down payment was $5,000. Yeah, it wasn't $14,000. It was $5,000. Anyway, and we had a nice car, and anyway, I moved out. But I didn't realize how lonely I'd be for my parents when I moved out. I hadn't had that chance to be totally away from them, like going away to college or something like that. And so when we did move to Livermore, because that's where Herman had his job, and we would go home every weekend and see my parents or see his parents and see some of our friends. I was homesick. I really was. And then, of course, I got pregnant 2 years after we were married, and that took care of my loneliness because I had my baby. But our first child, I always say, was our dog. Again, I'm allergic to hair, but we got a Chihuahua, which doesn't have much hair, dog hair. And so that was like my first baby. It really, it kept me from being lonely. What were my parents doing at this time in my life? Well, my mother was lonely for me too. And she was always a volunteer and had a lot of talents. She would paint and do, she would bake and do different things. And she went over, there is a home for retarded people not too far from where we live in Santa Rosa. It was called Eldridge. And it's a beautiful, beautiful old home. And she would, she got herself qualified to take a child home for the day. And she would bring a child and they would paint. And so that was her way of assuaging her loneliness for, the empty nest, I guess you'd say. And so she volunteered for that. And of course, that was the kind of place where children like my little sister who had died with Down syndrome would be. And I think some of the children she brought home did have Down syndrome. And it'd just be for the day, she'd feed them lunch and then take them back for the evening. And anyway, they don't do that anymore, I don't think, in Eldridge. People are in halfway houses. They're in, they're cared for in different ways. But it was a good way to take care of the children whose parents couldn't take care of them, I guess. Oh, and my mother, I do remember when again, Paulette and I would do good things too. When we were around 16 or so, 16, 17, 18, we would take her mother or my mother would help us make cookies or bake bread. My mother always baked bread. We would take that to the hospital, at Christmas time, at Easter, at different, times for to the county hospital. So we did good things too. We did volunteer to do good things. And I was a secretary of the Girls League, and we would have a project to take things out to the girls at the reform school. And, we did philanthropic things too, not just get in trouble. Although we didn't get in trouble, we should have, but thank God we didn't. Well, I thought I was going to be a teacher, an art teacher. I have an artistic talent. I could look at you and draw your picture just like you look. I was a good artist. But also, when I took my aptitude test, it said I was a helper. I was somebody who liked to, like a nurse. That would have been a good profession for me. And of course, my older sister, Virginia, who became a PhD public health nurse, was in that milieu of inspiration to me. And let's see, did I attend college? Yes. How long and how did you like it? I loved school, whatever. And I continued to, even though I graduated after Herman and I got married. Actually, that was one of the things. Once we got married, I got straight A's because I wasn't worried about going out on dates or anything like. I still was, B's and A's, but I got straight A's afterwards. What was my mode of transportation by then? Oh, at summer school, George, and we were still friends with George and Cliff. I really had good friends who were boys as well. And one of the boys that I was good friends with, his parents, and he had refurbished an old car. And he would bring it to school in the summer, and that's when we all took typing together, the boys and I and Shirley Ann and Paulette didn't, but Paulette didn't do anything. But we really had it. And they would drive me to my job, which was in an art agency, and so I learned how to do commercial art. And now they do it all by computers and everything. It's easy, but we'd have to do paste ups and we'd have to draw our own pictures and things. Now it's commercial art is easy compared to what it was then. But anyway, I learned a lot in that summer job. Did I travel anywhere for fun? When I was in 8th grade, going back to 8th grade, I was allowed, one of my girlfriends, I no longer even am in touch with her, I don't know. But anyway, we were very good friends in 8th grade, and her parents, he was an insurance salesman, and her parents had a beautiful home in town. And I was really touched when I was 13 years old. Her mother, and she gave me the first birthday party I'd ever had. And just really a surprise, and invited my girlfriends there. So anyway, we were very good friends, and they moved away to Fresno. So I was allowed, when I was in 8th grade, to get on the bus and travel all the way to Fresno at Easter time to spend a week with her. And when I was there, we found a lost dog that we returned to somebody. She had me draw a picture of her and her brother. As I say, I was an artist. And her brother was named Terry. And poor kid, he had some emotional problems. He wet his bed. He was still wetting his bed at the age of I was in 8th grade and she was so we were about 13, 14. He must have been about 10. He was still wetting his bed, if you can imagine. So, it was traumatic for me to be there to see that dynamic in their house. But anyway, here's the story. When I became a nurse for my surgeon, we became incorporated, and we invested again in real estate for our retirement. And one of the retirement things was, do you know the Emeryville Shore? Are you familiar with that Emeryville Shore complex? I mean, a huge condominium, huge, successful real estate development along the shore of San Francisco Bay. Anyway, Terry ended up being a lawyer. He went to school, became a lawyer. Terry was the comptroller for this investment. Again, it is a successful thing now, but, and I lay this back to his wetting his bed, he was not honest, and my boss lost money in that investment thing that we went with. But it eventually, I don't know whether Terry and his group got out of it or another group took over or whatever to make it successful, but I warned my boss. I said, I know this family. and the other thing, and I found out the father, maybe this is why we're not friends. I mean, I never said anything about it to her, obviously. I mean, I still, my mother wrote to her mother, and I wrote nice letters to Earlene. I never said anything about this, but when I was in the surgeon's office and I would do the insurance, we had this dear, dear little man, Filipino man, who was a farm laborer. And he worked stoop labor. He was Filipino, stoop labor, and he had bought an insurance company. This is what Mr. Sheldon, Earlene's father, sold, is to these farm laborers, insurance to these farm laborers, and he made a very good living doing it. Sent his son to become a lawyer. So, lived in a beautiful house. I found out that the same insurance company that I remembered he worked for, now I don't know if he sold this poor man this insurance policy that paid for nothing. It didn't pay for the hospital. It paid $30 for the hospital. The hospital bill was $30,000. I think it paid $10 for the anesthesiologist. The anesthesiologist was at least $600, and our bill was at least that as well. But of course, my boss being very ethical, and again, my knowing that this was the kind of insurance that Mr. Sheldon got rich on, selling to these poor little farm workers. They would pay $200 a month. Yeah, it wasn't much, but they got nothing. And of course, the hospital dogged him for it, sent him to collection. The anesthesiologist was, he wasn't kind at all to the man. We did not ask him for any money. So for the next 10 years, this dear little man became my friend. He would write me a letter to Mrs. Ruth and Dr. Geckel. Thank you so much for your help, blah, blah, blah. I can still work. And he would bring us the freshest asparagus, just fresh picked. I mean, you've never tasted asparagus like asparagus from the field. Oh my God, he'd bring us a whole lug. I'd get half, and Dr. Geckel would take half home to his wife. And he'd bring us the freshest strawberries. I mean, just the most beautiful hand-picked strawberries. Freshest peaches. Freshest, anything he picked, he would bring it. That's how he paid us for the next 10 years. So anyway, when he passed away, as I say, my boss had passed away, and I had gone to work for another physician. I still stayed in touch with him because my son, John's best friend had been a Filipino boy whose mother had worked for us and spoke Tagalog. Anyway, I took her with me to visit him in Stockton when he was very old, and they would talk Tagalog together. And anyway, so I stayed with, and I would still get cards. He would have somebody go buy a card to Mrs. Ruth, you know. And anyway, sweet old man. But maybe that's why I didn't stay friends with Herlene. It just wasn't in the stars, you know, because I really, when I found out that Terry, A, had wasted our money, B, that her father had been one of those shysters who sold insurance that was worth nothing to these poor farm workers, you know, I mean, I let it go by, you know, I didn't answer her or something, so I don't even know where she's at. I guess Terry did tell me when we lost the money that she had made money from his investments. Sorry that we hadn't, or something like that. You know, I mean, he had taken care of his sister, but he didn't take care of us. My grandfather had been an honest insurance, you know, I mean, an honest real estate investor. You know, he was during the, I mean, it ruined his family's, you know, they had to sell their home and everything, but he paid back all his investors, you know, I mean, he was honest, but I don't think Mr. Sheldon was. Did I have a midlife crisis? Well, of course, when our son was injured, that was terrible. That was terrible. I mean, he's done better than some, because we did stay fast. We went and, you know, we were with him every day. My boss let me off for a whole month. He hired somebody to take my place, and again, I would go in real early in the morning, get my work done, get my sterilizing done, all my stuff done, and we'd see patients as early as possible. As soon as he got done with his surgery, he'd come to the office, and then he'd let me off in the afternoon, even when I came back. So I was with John, you know, day after day after day, 6 months. And in fact, and then I'd come home at night at 11 o'clock at night, and Herman got to go back to work. I mean, he had to go back to work. But I worked part-time during that 6 months, lost 40 pounds. Anyway, I remember driving home one night. I was so tired. You know those bumpy bumps that are on the road? Anyway, if they hadn't been there, I would have gone off in the ditch, because my eyes were open, but my brain was asleep. So I've never done that before. Since then, I've never done that since then. If I get tired, I pull over, you know. But I was so exhausted, and those bumpy bumps saved my life. John has an amazing work ethic. I guess it came from my parents and his parents, and you know, I mean, it came from all of us. I mean, he has, you know, mounted many odds, and he still does every day. You know, and he's getting older. As he says now, he really hopes to go to 4 days a week, because you know his body is just wearing out. You know, the few muscles that remain, because he's not a paraplegic that can build muscle. He's a quadriplegic, and but I mean, he's had some lucky breaks when it was time for him to finish to apply for medical school. He was accepted at all the medical schools he applied to. So but he stayed at the one that was the easiest for him. He stayed at Davis. He could have gone to San Francisco, but all of their handicapped services were up elevators and stairs, and it was ridiculous. He could have gone to, you know, Duke. He could have gone to Harvard. He was accepted at all those, but Harvard, the weather, no way. And Stanford, he was accepted at Stanford, and he turned them down because he thought, well, I'll go to graduate school there. Well, by the time he got to graduate school, they said, you turned us down once. But he did get a fellowship from them. He did get a fellowship for 1 year after he had gotten his MD, which was nice. But anyway, he's had some lucky breaks. He's always been lucky, really, except you wouldn't say that being injured was lucky. But you know, his life would have been different. He could do anything. He was our golden boy. I used to pinch myself and say, how did I get such an intelligent, good, ethical, nice boy? You know, how did I ever raise such a nice person? I would pinch myself and say, am I real? And anyway, that was terrible. That changed our lives. But again, we stayed steadfast when the Department of Rehab of California turned us down for medical help. His national merit, he was a National Merit Scholar also. They kicked up the amount that they gave him for school, and I wrote a letter to the doctor who was in charge of rehab at that time, and I said, you know, if my son becomes a doctor, they wanted him to go into biochemistry or something. No, you can't be a doctor. No, I've been accepted at all these schools. You know, he's been accepted. Let's have another visit. I said, and anyway, we went 3 times with John in a wheelchair and me, you know, saying, I'm going to take this to the newspapers if you don't. Anyway, they gave us, finally, they paid for his books, his tuition, and part of his transportation, although we had bought a van for him, and a second-hand van, and Herman had refurbished it, so it had all the, you know, the things. And at first he couldn't drive it, but after a year he became strong enough that he could drive it because it had handicap accessories. But, you know, he had some bad times too. He had an attendant. I mean, John has to have range of motion and bowel programs and help with catheterization. He's paralyzed. His internal organs are paralyzed. And you hire people to do that. And one of his hirees, she was a black lady. She had 3 children and lived in the same apartment complex at college that he did. And so she would just come over for her part. You know, it was really very, very advantageous for her, and he paid her more money under the table, you know, to be his assistant, to be his aide. Anyway, I guess he trusted her so much he gave her his credit card one day, and she went down and used it for more than what she was supposed to get. And so, you know, when someone steals from you, and you know, and they have cameras that tell you who comes to the ATM, and when he and his friend went and checked to make sure it really was her that used the credit card, but he had trusted her, you know, and given her his password, and anyway, when she did that, he had to let her go. So that was very traumatic, to find a new person. And one of the people he found was a doctor's son. And we thought, oh, good, you know, he'll be trustworthy. He was a jerk. He decided he was going to go to a football game, and John needed to have a bowel program. I mean, if John doesn't have these things done for him, he could have a stroke. He could die. And this flake, I'm not coming. You know, I mean, and he knew how serious it was, you know. So, I mean, it was, but anyway, you learn after a while. He has a wonderful lady who comes and helps him now named Bernie. When we were first married, gas was only 32 cents a gallon. Can you imagine? And we had 2 cars, and Herman would go and buy a car without me even being there. Another control issue, you know. I was working, yes, I was working, but 4 days a week, but, you know, that cost a little bit of money. But anyway, these control issues of not telling me when he was going to buy a car, comes home with, well, sure, I like the car. Well, sure, you know, I had a good car. Anyway, we had, over the years, we've had 28 cars, 6 homes. Whenever Herman gets a bug, I acquiesce like my mother acquiesced, like this is a pattern. But now I'm getting older, and I stand up for myself, and I say, this is the last home we're getting. Even though it's tiny and got too much stuff in it, this is it. And he admits we should have never sold Pleasanton. Anyway, he works so hard, and he is so talented. He can do anything. He can do brickwork. He can do sheetrock. He can do anything. You know, like now he's doing something. You know, making cement pole for me for my bird feeder. And anyway, he's so talented, and he is smart and intelligent, and you know, I mean, my life hasn't been that bad, right? So, you know, anyway, but as we get older, we get on each other's nerves. And of course, now both of us, you know, he's ill and I'm ill. We just, you know, we cope. And we're going to celebrate 59 years. How about that? On December 31st. And Dad will be happy. Do you have any grandchildren? Of course, yeah, Will and Lucas. Oh, those were our happy days. Taking care of those kids. In fact, this was our babysitting house. We lived in Pleasanton, and I was getting up at 2 a.m. in the morning so that I would have time to shower and drive all the way to Antioch to take care of little Will when he was born. You know, because Julie had to be at work at 6. I think she had to be at work or leave by 6. Anyway, to get there by 6. So we decided when our house came on the market, it had a nice view, and I remember sitting in the real estate office. Well, Herman would have to commute, and we would have to sell Pleasanton, which we didn't do at that time. We kept it, and we only sold it when we wanted to buy the mountain house and of course we had a cabin at Tahoe before then, which we loved very much. In fact, I wish we'd never sold it, but it helped us pay off this house. I mean, we paid off our houses early. When my boss died, I got a nice large retirement fund from our investments, from our real estate investments that did pan out, and so we paid off our house. We had it was an 11% variable, if you can imagine. So that saved us a lot of money. We paid off our Pleasant house. We paid off this house. We paid off our Polypine house. We've never had house payments since 1983. We've never had house payments. How often do you see your parents and siblings? Well, my parents, of course, are gone. I took care of my mother. I took care of Herman's father and his mother. They never had to go to rest homes. Or convalescent homes, and of course, I have the will, if I have the strength, to take care of Herman if he gets that, and of course I'll hire somebody to help me if need be, and we don't want to be a burden to our kids. I mean, we have enough money to hire somebody, that'll work out, and I don't mind cleaning bedpans or changing sheets or whatever. I don't mind that. In fact, when my mother was here with us for a year and a half, almost two, she was bedridden for the last 6 months, and her mind was sharp as a tack, but her body had failed her, and we had fun. We really did. We learned something new every day. She said, "Well, let's learn about something in the encyclopedia today under A, or whatever," and we'd find a topic and we'd explore that topic, and we'd reminisce, of course. One of the things, I guess I have to tell you this story. This is kind of neat. When she was here with us in 1993, we got the chance to go on an Alaskan cruise with our friends. And she said, "Oh, well, in the town of Ketchikan, when she was 12 years old, her father had been a shipbuilder. He built these big, beautiful 40-foot, 50-foot long boats that were steam and sail, and sold them to people who could afford those things. But before he would sell them, he would do a shakedown cruise, and that was all the way from Grays Harbor, Washington, up to Alaska. And that was one of the reasons why he didn't want my mother to go to college. He wanted to keep her as his crew member to do all this, And my grandmother was an artist. I mean, she could make lace, but she also made fishnets, and she could do all this, and she made sails. She sewed them herself, and so they lived a good life, a simple life, but a good life. And anyway, when my mother was 12, and they were on the shakedown cruise to Alaska that year, she and her mother, Belle, went ashore in Ketchikan. Ketchikan? Yeah, Ketchikan. And they were collecting wood for the boiler, for the steam boiler, driftwood along this creek that came out, and there was very little development at that time. And they followed the creek up to this waterfall. And she told me this waterfall is about, I can't remember now what she said, but I wrote it all down. It's about a mile from the ocean. So anyway, at that time, she and her mother had inscribed their initials in a tree. B, Belle Klein, BC, and AC. Okay, would you go and see if that inscription is still there? I mean, here my mother is 91 years old. Would you, on your trip? Well, anyway, we went on this trip, and of course, between that time, be 1915, I guess, yeah, be 1915, there was no development. I mean, there was a town, but there wasn't any development along this creek. The salmon went up the creek, to spawn. Anyway, when we got there, in 1993, of course, there was all this development that had soon come after. It's now touristy type stuff, but it had been apartments for ladies of ill repute. It had been, apartments of ill use along this creek. So anyway, Herman and I had to climb. We had brought old clothes, of course. Had to climb behind all these houses to get up to where the waterfall was, you know, for a mile, and then look across where these trees would be. And the trees, some trees were still there. But I had my video camera, you know, the bigger thing than that, you know, that I carried with me, and I was going to take a picture of these trees. And at that time, I was ignorant of the fact that trees grow this way and from the top. In other words, the tree that they had inscribed would still, the initials would still be there if it was there, if a beaver hadn't cut it down. Okay, it was a good thing that houses of ill repute had gone along the tree, because that made the beavers go elsewhere. So the tree, if you can imagine, was still there. We went and knocked on the door of a present owner of, or tenant, I guess you'd say, of this house, no longer ill repute, a tourist trap by now, and said, could we go behind their house? And we told him the story. He said, oh, that sounds great. Let's do that. Well, anyway, the stairs down to the creek were rotted out. We were gonna, you know, we had to climb. I mean, it was a feat getting down there. I mean, in 1993, I was agile and young, obviously, and so was Herman. But this man helped us and get down behind, and we looked at all the trees, and there, if you can imagine, even though they had grown, you know, bark had filled in, because the rounded ones hadn't filled in, the B, the straight edge of my A was gone, but this, you could see the C, the two C's, and the part of the B. And I got a video of it. Can you imagine? Brought it home to my mother. She was thrilled. And by that time she had cataracts, and you know, she couldn't. And we put it in her, you know, in the VCR port, and showed it to her. And it was hard for her to see. Well, I can barely see it. Where's the snapshot? Oh, Mama, I didn't take a snapshot. Oh dear. So she had to look at this darn video that wasn't really that clear for her. But anyway, she was thrilled that she had given us these directions to find this wonderful artifact. Can you imagine? Well, and while we were on board ship, once we had found it, we became friends with, or became acquaintances, I guess you'd say, with a couple who was traveling with their 12-year-old daughter. And they were all the way from South Carolina. They obviously had some bucks to come all the way from South Carolina to go to Alaska. And I said, you know, maybe you and your mother can do something like this, like leave, you know, put some notes in a bottle or something and bury it in a certain spot, and then you will come back when you're much older and bring your daughter, you know, or something. So anyway, her mother really perked up on that. She said, yeah, let's do that. So I don't know if they ever did or not, but we told the story anyway. So that might live on in another person's life, to do something like that. My mother has done other things like that too. When we went, there's a place up in Mendocino called, it was, I don't even know if it's still there or not, it's called Heritage House. It's a very expensive bed and breakfast at the time. It was where the movie, same time last year, was filmed. I don't know if you've heard of that movie. But anyway, we went there for one of our anniversary trips with some real good friends of ours. And I told, again, my mother was living with us, and we had my sister come and take care of her while we were gone, or my brother would come and take care of her while we were gone. She said, oh, well, your dad and I flew into that airport in whatever year it was. And she said, and there's a blueberry bush right there by that airport. And it's 3 feet from, you know, whatever. I mean, she said, we went and found that blueberry bush and brought her back some blueberries from Mendocino. And so anyway, she would send us on these little treks. She was a character, and had a great memory, of course, and sharp as a tack, until she died of congestive heart failure. She was on medication, and my sister Rosie and I had gone to church, and Herman and my other sister Virginia were here with her when she passed, and she'd always said, "Now I don't want to go to a hospital. No." But then at the last minute she said, "When's that doctor coming?" You know, at the last minute she decided, maybe I will live a little longer. But no, her heart stopped, and then of course her breathing stopped. I've seen death many times, taking care of her, taking care of Herman's father, taking care of my dad, and I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of it. It's a natural thing. I took care of my sister Virginia down in Arizona during her last breath, and it's peaceful, and if the Bible's true, they're going to a better place. You hope that is. Nobody's come back. People have said they've come back, but What was my worst style moment? Well, of course, mini skirts. I don't have that. Well, my legs aren't that bad, but I have big hair. I have fleshy thighs. Let's put it that way. They're not as pretty as I think. Not as pretty as Paulette's. But I look pretty good when I was younger. And I never got really fat. Anyway, let's see. But mini skirts. You had to wear mini skirts. I've got pictures. Would you break the law to save a loved one? As Herman said, well, it depends. Do I really love that person? Anyway, what's your favorite physical feature? Well, my smile and my teeth. I always was complimented on my smile and my teeth, and luckily, because my parents were not wealthy enough to really have braces, as some of my girlfriends had, and Paulette had good teeth too, although she never brushed her. She really didn't take care of herself. She wasn't, I don't know. Anyway, she actually had to have her teeth removed because she would not go to a dentist. My parents would take me to a dentist for a filling, but she would not, and so I don't know whether she's had that implants or anything now. I don't know. I haven't seen her to judge that. I know she's talked about it, but it's so painful. She's very squeamish. She's not going to put herself through any pain. So maybe she's still using false teeth. I don't know. But anyway, she's still beautiful. I've seen pictures of her. I just haven't seen her personally. She lives back in Syracuse, New York now, and she has a ex-daughter-in-law who lives in Germany, and so right now she's visiting her grandchildren in Germany. What is something you always wish you knew more about or got to experience? If I'd been born later in life, I might have gone to medical school. I really do love being helpful to cure things and help things. But in my age, it was just kind of at the cusp where you didn't, you became a nurse. You didn't have any higher expectations. In 1956, you didn't have really higher expectations. What was one of the most valuable things you've bought in your lifetime? Well, probably our home in Tahoe was the most valuable, and really, it was quite special. It had been built for the 1966 Winter Olympics. 1960 Winter Olympics, and as a way station by an orthopedic surgeon who was on the committee for the cross-country ski. And so they would come over the hill, Squaw Valley's over the hill, and then we'd come into the hill, into the valley that is the lake, and here is our cabin. And so they would come over the hill and then come by, and they would have to stop at this way station to make sure they had the right amount of weight before they shot their rifles, and you're tired and you're shaking and everything. You have to hit the target, and anyway, that was a way station. He was on the committee to do that. So it was a very small cabin, but it still had the Olympic rings on it when we bought it. But they wanted to keep those, so we let them have them. And but we fixed it up. We made it look really precious, and it really was precious when the kids were little. You'll see pictures of the kids, of Will and Lucas there too. And we sold it because we just weren't going to it very often anymore, and we thought, well, nobody's going to want to drive that far. And but it did, as I say, when we sold it, it was valuable enough to pay off, this house and other things. So, but anyway, that was the most valuable thing I think we've owned, and it was a good thing. It was a nice place to raise Julie and John, and John and Julie were good skiers. In fact, the day before he was injured, he came home and said, I've had the best day of my life skiing, and just, those experiences, they carry you through the bad moments, those wonderful aha moments that just, anyway, glad we had this. Bring back somebody famous for a day and hang out with them. Who would you pick? I would pick a woman. I would pick, well, now catch this. You probably won't like this, but I admire Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She fought for equal rights for women. And I'm looking forward to seeing the movie about her, to see, you know, and poor lady, she's going to have to, she's survived several bouts of cancer. She's been steadfast as a liberal, yes, supposedly, but yet she's done good things for women. She really has. So I would, and she was loving to her husband and to her children, and you know, an admirable lady. So I'm looking forward to seeing that movie that's about her. And I know that's not what Republicans say, and I am a registered Republican, but I admire Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I do. My mother, I bring back my mother, because she, again, was a exemplary person. When things would disappoint her, and she had disappointments in her life, she was able to say, she'd go, and she'd laugh, say, well, that's the way it is. So I admire that, and I sometimes don't do that. I don't stay calm. I will, no, that's got to be fixed. That's got to be. But I admire her. Well, that's the way it is, you know, and I admire her. It'd be my mother. That's who I bring back. Yeah. Okay. All right. What do I not understand about the young generation of America today? Well, I try to understand them. If they tell me what I'll go along with what they're, you know, I understand what they want to tell me if they'll tell me. I don't judge. I usually don't. I don't like Lucas's mustache, but, God, I don't know. Anyway, any pet peeves? I try to act like my mother, and in that case, I like to say, well, that's the way it is. How do you want people to remember me? Well, I want them to remember me as a kind person, who does go the extra mile. I will walk through hot coals to help somebody. I really will. I have done that to help John, to help Herman's dad. I became a chameleon to help my mother. I mean, I became an 90-year-old woman to you know, and to help her, you know, in her illness. I really did. You know, I can become like the person I'm helping, so that we can get along. And that's what I want to do. And I wish people would respect me for that. I don't know. If you could ask God one question, what would it be? Another thing I wish I'd ask God, if there was a God. Why is there so much pain in the world? You know, to good people that have bad things happen to them. Why? I do know that part of the reason possibly why, you know, bad things happen is that so that good people can step in and help make things better. I mean, I know if I gave up and didn't help my son, or I gave up and didn't help my mother, you know, die, and didn't help his father, you know, die in a home situation rather than going to a place. I mean, we did, when we went on vacation one time, we put Grandpa in an Alzheimer's care unit, but we came back and somebody had stolen he always had to have his passport in his pocket. That was just one thing he wanted, and he was a wanderer, and so they had to, you know, keep him corralled, but they had tried to make him do something he didn't want to do, and he had a torn, you know, and so that would be terrible to have, you know, and we just couldn't leave him there. We had spent a lot of money to put him there, and we paid for 3 months, but we took him out in 3 weeks when we came back home, because people were not treating him with dignity. You have to treat people like that with dignity. Let them do what they want to do, or redirect them. Yes, when Grandpa wanted to go out walking in the rain, I would say, well, let's dance. I have some music. He loved to dance. He was a good dancer. When his mother taught her 2 sons when they were young lads, they had to take dancing lessons and elocution lessons and etiquette lessons. You know, that was the German way, I'm sure you know. And so he was always polite and oh, all right, well then we'd dance. So that would take his mind off of wanting to go out in the rain for a little while. And then, and then he had a favorite book. He loved America. He just loved America. He had become a naturalized citizen, obviously. And this book, I could always, oh, Grandpa, let's look at these pictures in this book, you know, of America. And I had several of those, and that would redirect him, you know, and just for 20 minutes, 30 minutes or whatever, until the rain stopped, and then we would go walking. Because as I say, I was a chameleon. I would do what he wanted to do if we could do it. You know, if it was dangerous or stupid, I tried to redirect him, you know, and that would work. And actually, Herman and I became experts on taking care of Alzheimer's patients because he was never angry. He was never trouble, really. It was just that, you know, you had to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it, or redirect him successfully. And so we had ways of doing that. And Herman, when Grandpa would get up in the middle of the night and he'd want to go out and go walking, well, Herman spent the night with him that last year, and Herman would sleep on the couch in a sleeping bag. And when Grandpa would start going out the door, you know, actually Herman did something ingenious. He put a motion sensor on Grandpa's walker, and Grandpa's walker would be right by his bed. So when he would get out of bed, he'd say, hell with that thing, you know, move that thing aside. It would make a sound, and then Herman would wake up, help Grandpa go to the bathroom, and then redirect him back into the bed. Grandpa would even get up and make his bed. He was going. But you know, and when Grandpa did die, it was really sad. He had a bird. He had a bird that he would get up in the middle of the night before he got so bad that he would go out at night. I mean, this was his last year that he would go out at night. But before that, until the end, he had a bird. And he would get up and feed Tweety a little something, a little cracker or something in the middle of the night. That was his favorite thing to do. Well, anyway, when Grandpa died, I had to take the darn bird home. And again, I'm allergic to feathers. So I would clean the cage. I would feed him. I would give him water. But I never talked to him. I mean, this bird. That you put hearts on your tree. And of course, I used to have a big tree. And I was allergic to pine. Well, Julie and I would always get sick when we had a pine. So we finally went to artificial trees. Now I'm down to the itty bitty. But I've got hearts on my trees. And I've also got shoes under my trees. These are Herman's shoes when he was a baby. These are Lucas's shoes. These are my aunt's golf shoes. These are not anybody's shoes that they wore, but of course, being from Germany, that's what they're supposed to be for. And then these are what I wore, if you can imagine, when I was first married, these toe killers. And now I've graduated to duck feet. So anyway, this is the ancestral memories that we have at Christmas. That's the tradition I have at Christmas. And I don't have Will's shoes for some reason, but I have some shoes that were my mom's too. But I haven't put them out yet. But that's, instead of stockings, you put shoes out, and you'd put a little gift in the shoes. Who was absolutely beautiful. I mean, I wasn't bad looking, but she was. You better turn it off. Okay. What would you do differently if you knew nobody would judge me? That's a real deep question. What would I do differently if nobody would judge me? Okay. Oh, back to life. She's still living. Oh, it said back to life. Oh dear, so it had to be somebody dead. Oh, well, I don't know. Well, I wrote down something that I'm not going to tell you. I don't know. I didn't answer that, so I don't really know. Have you got an idea?
Think about it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a deep question. What has anybody else said about that one? Okay,
it's always a stumbling block.
Yeah, well, I think the bird died of a broken heart one night. One night I came up About a month later, the bird was dead. I think the bird died of a broken heart. He didn't have Grandpa come and I wasn't doing it.